To begin with, the alternation we are studying in this project is between the preterite form of a verb and the participle form. In certain cases, speakers will substitute the participle form for the preterite form in places where the preterite form would be grammatical, as in the first example here. The grammatical sentence would be I saw him, but some speakers of English will say I seen him instead. The second example comes directly from our data, where the speaker uses done in one case where it would be grammatical to say did, but the same speaker later uses did in a similar situation. Do is one of the verbs that we looked at, but we also looked at many other verbs such as see, come, swim, and others. We looked at every verb in the dataset from DECTI that has a distinct past and preterite form. So this would be verbs like see, where the past is saw and the preterite is seen. We wouldn't have included any verbs where the participle and the preterite are the same, as obviously you wouldn't be able to see a difference. A short summary of our findings is as follows. We found that the type of verb, the presence of a particle, and the frequency of the verb were all significant language internal factors. The verbs were separated into three categories for the analysis. One of the verb see, another of the verb do, and a third category containing other verbs. In this case, the presence of a particle refers to a verb that is made up of the main verb and a particle, such as take off, which does not have the same meaning as the verb take by itself. It does not include a verb followed by a particle, such as get in the meaning get in the car, as that would be part of the prepositional phrase. We also looked at a variety of language external factors, but we found that only social class and the subcorpus of the data were significant. DECTI contains 3 different subcorpuses, and we were able to see which subcorpus each data point came from, and we found this to be significant in the analysis. We also found an interaction between the subcorpus and the presence of a particle. So this would be in each subcorpus, but only in verbs that have a particle. And in these cases, we found that there was a weakening of the alternation beginning in the oldest subcorpus, but then a strengthening as it proceeded through time, as the subcorpuses are ranged from oldest to recent interviews that took place in the last couple of years. So we concluded that there was a change over time in this alternation when it comes to particle verbs. Moving on to the background, the papers listed in this slide were used as the background for the project. Some of them were used more for the analysis part, while others informed decisions about what factors we ended up looking at, but they were all important for the process. So in the following, I will give a short summary of each paper. The first paper is Anderwald 2009, and this paper is titled Naturalness in the English Past Tense System. It provides a summary of the types of verbs that are found in the English language. Anderwald separates them into categories based on the changes that take place in the verb for their past and participle forms. She outlines 5 verb classes in English, and she also mentions that these verbs can change categories over time if they undergo a change in their past or participle forms. It is also the case that non-standard dialects of English can have changes in verb classes that are not present in the standard dialect. Underwold makes the point that verbs usually move from a strong class to a weak class, or from a weak class to another weak class. It is rare for a verb to move from a strong class to a weak class. The second paper is by Tagliamonte, published in 2001, and it is about variation within the verb come. This is a verb that has high non-standard usage within both North American and British English varieties. And this specific paper focuses on York English, studying differences between usage of come and came in different situations. And the external factors of sex, age, and education were studied, as well as the internal factors of temporal disambiguation, narrative present, person/number of subject, and presence of a verbal particle. Verbal particles are found to be significant for the oldest group, but the other internal factors were not found to be significant. And for the external factors, they were found to be significant, but education was only significant in the younger generation studied. The third paper, Chadden et al., looks at the Preterite and Tyneside English through the use of the Decti corpus. The paper also looks at two American corpuses, Switchboard and the Philadelphia Neighborhood Corpus. In this case, the study is of the preterite form appearing in places where the past would be grammatical, as in I've broke the door instead of I've broken the door. This was studied specifically in the perfect construction, which those previous sentences were in a perfect construction. There were a number of language internal variables studied, like tense, negation, person and number of the subject, and verb frequency. Also noted were whether the sentence was a question, whether there was intervening material between the auxiliary and the past participle, and the phonological difference between the forms of the verbs. The tense of the construction and the phonological difference from the present tense were found to be strong predictors of the alternation, but the others were not as relevant. And the language internal external variables studied were gender, social class / education, changes in real time, and age, of which education and social class was found to be significant across 3 data sets, and age is found to be significant across 2. The final paper is Bybee, and this is the work Morphology, a study of the relation between meaning and form, and it discusses a number of different classes of English verbs. One of these is the class in which the present form of the verb is not the same as the past form, and the participle form is also different from the previous 2 forms. In addition, the participle form contains a schwa. An example of this would be the verb swim, as the other two forms are swam and swum, and swum contains a schwa. These are also discussed in Anderwald under the label of Bybee verbs, and we use this term in our analysis for a specific subsection of verbs.
Data collection, materials, and procedures. This study utilized the diachronic electronic corpus of Tyneside English, Corrigan et al., 2012. It supports real and apparent time between 1970 and 2010. And it currently consists of audio recordings, transcriptions, and associated material related to 3 corpora research project. TLS for the Tyneside Linguistic Survey, PVC for the phonological variation and change in contemporary spoken British English, and Nectar 2 for the Newcastle Electronic Corpus of Tyneside English 2. It can be seen in the graph that Nectar 2 began in 2007, although it has a broader geographical reach than either TLS and PVC. 161 male and female speakers participated in this study, and the number of the token extracted was 79 verbs out of the total 5,484. And in order to extract the target verbs, a Python script is used for this purpose, and also in the process of extracting and coding, we move examples that include to support the verb to be and canonical particle. For the coding process, the target tokens are coded for verb type, a participle verb, subject person, subject number, and lemma frequency. Also in this study, we didn't look only at language external factors as previous research our studies did, such as Teglemonte. We also includes language internal factors such as verb, particle, the person number, and verb frequency. As for external factor, we considered sex, age, education level, social class, and subcorpus. Statistically, we fitted a logistic mixed effects regression in R using Glemma. Here is the formula. As can be seen, we include 6 components that most likely affect Preterite variation in Tyneside English. They are type. Type is coded as Preterite versus participle, which are the main predictor. Verb type, particles of a class, and subcorpus as the dependent variable. Regarding the verb type, this includes the verb like see, and do, and other verbs, including by be, verb list. For the class, working class, and middle class, etc., the subcorpus includes the 3 subcorpora, PVC, TLS, and nectar 2. We also, in this formula, we take the interaction between subcorpus and particle into consideration. And finally, the random effects are the verb and speaker. Now, for the results, the output of the fitted model show that significant effects for verb type, particle presence, frequency, social class, and subcorpus, as shown in the table below. Also, we noted like see, and then do, and the verb with the stress, open mid back, and rounded vowel are the mostly used with the participle form. While participle form for preterite verbs are mostly used with low frequency verbs, particle verbs, and by working class speakers or blue collar. These visualizations aid to see the significance effects, as well shown in the logistic regression model, mixed models. With regard the interaction between the subcorpus and the particle, we see there are significant interaction effects between the particle presence and subcorpus, as can be seen here in the table, which shows a real-time weakening and then restricting of the particle presence main effect.
Right, so overall what we're seeing basically is it looks like there's a change from above towards a prescriptive norm, that we're going away from having this participle form of the preterite showing up, and that seems to be going away in real time. That it's going away in real time, and also the working class speakers seem to favor that participle form over the middle class, gives us this sense that change in real time is a change from above. We should point out, though, that the frequency effects actually suggest analogical leveling, where the lower frequency verbs that are occurring more often in the participle form, that seems to suggest that there's a change towards this participle form showing up for the preterite. So there might be some countervailing trends going on in our data, and perhaps it's something like that the sort of main verbs that this is happening with are decreasing in the participle form, moving towards that prescriptive norm. But at the same time, some of these lower frequency verbs with the schwa in their past participle are increasing in frequency of using the participle form there. So overall, we've got that change from above. We want to make 2 points of comparison to previous work that we think are sort of interesting as well. The first is to compare our results with what Tagliamonte found in York. So, she was looking at the verb come and found that there's this interaction between social factors and whether it's a particle verb or not. And what she had found is that the effect of the particle was getting lost among younger speakers. So basically the linguistic conditioning of whether it's a particle verb or not was decreasing over time. And so in this study, we also found that same sort of interaction going on. But what was really interesting is that we find that effect decrease between 1970 and 1995. So basically, if we're taking Tagliamonte 2001 as sort of representative of that same sort of time period, we see that same lessening over time. But then we also see that the linguistic factor is actually re-strengthening from 1995 to about 2010. And so on the one hand, it's really interesting to see that we have 2 Northern Englishes, they're doing the same thing pre-2001. But because we have that weakening and then re-strengthening of the linguistic factor, suggests to us that this might have been hypercorrection going on with speakers sort of in the progress of the change from above. The second point we want to make is sort of comparing our results to results that have been found with variation in the actual participle in Tyneside English, where the preterite form can variably surface. And so this variability within a single dialect of both the preterite and the participle has been taken perhaps as a sign that the category distinction is being lost. And so we might ask that same thing of Tyneside English then. And what's interesting is to compare the factors that actually condition the variation then. So the Chatton et al. Study that we've mentioned on participle variation actually shows that working class favors leveling. We see frequency effects. That's the same thing that we find in this study on preterite variation. But what's really interesting is that where we find real-time change in production of the preterite, they actually find that variation in the participle is stable in real time and perhaps age-graded. So they're very different pattern over time here. At the same time, this participle variable, so if variation in the perfect that can show up as the preterite form, seems to apply to all past participles, and morphophonology seems to be a conditioning factor. In our study, we're finding that preterite variation seems to be pretty lexically and phonotactically restricted instead. And so taking it back to this perhaps question of whether the category between preterite and participle is being lost, well, there are some similarities in the conditioning of these 2 variables, but the change over time patterning versus stable variation seems to suggest that these variables are being treated differently within the community. And we also, because of the lexical and phonotactic restrictions on preterite variation as opposed to participle variation, we seem to have different envelopes of variation even. So what we want to suggest is that rather than being a sign that the category distinction is being lost, we actually have 2 robust categories and 2 different sociolinguistic variables. It's just that their variants happen to be each other. So thanks very much for listening. We're looking forward to talking with you about this more in the Q&A